Digital TCGs, Hex uses a priority-based system, so you can respond to cards that your opponent is playing. There's a lot of back and forth. Another thing that makes interactive decks a little bit better in Hex than in games like Magic is that you'll note here, my opponent and I have different portraits on each side here, and these portraits are not just cosmetic. They determine your starting health total, so you can see my opponent starts with 25 health and I start with 22. And they also help you kind of determine like what type of deck your opponent is likely to be playing. So for instance, I look at my opponent's deck, and Calic is a high starting life total champion that Fate Weaves. They're likely playing a mid-range or control deck, and my opponent sees my champion, which generates this aggressive troop, a 1/1 with flight and speed to beat my opponent down, and they likely know that I'm playing an aggressive deck, so you can make informed mulliganing decisions before the match even starts here. I think I want to just redraw this hand. It's got all of our thresholds, and it's got a Boltwing and combat trains, but like we don't have anything to do for the first 2 turns of the game, and because I'm a more aggressive deck, I really want to be kind of getting set up. This hand's a little bit better. This hand has 2 ice in it, which is a great use of the digital design space. It uses a mechanic called Fate Weave here. So Fate Weave basically lets me stack my deck. You can kind of think of this as like a super scry land. So I'm going to go ahead and play out this the Sapphire Ice here. And what this does is lets me choose resource or non-resource, and it stacks that type of card on top of my deck. So because I already have my next 2 resource drops guaranteed here, I'm going to make sure I draw a non-resource next turn. Yeah, so what we're playing is kind of a tempo burn deck that also plays a card called Soul of Battle, which gives one of our troops crush and double damage until end of turn. So it has a pseudo combo finish inside of it. We're going to play Arcane Focus here. It lets me look at the top 2 cards of my deck and then draw one of them. Flickering Gobbler. This is one of our powerful cards in our tempo deck. This is a 2/2 for 2 that is Ruby and Sapphire that has Flight, Speed, and Rage 1. So every time this card attacks, it gains +1 power permanently. And it says, at the end of my turn, if I played an action, this bounces back to my hand. And if I didn't play an action, I have to sacrifice. So this card is super powerful because it gets to dodge. It gets to dodge things like, what's the word I'm searching for? It dodges basic speed interaction. This deck's probably about $80. Runebinds, although Runebinds are coming down and Boltwings are in the new set too. Hex does not have a mobile client, so unlike a lot of the digital TCGs, Hex does not have a unit limit to how many things you can have on the board. Yes, the flickering, so Hex tracks modifiers through zones. And also, like, this Mind Call is a good example of a card, like, you couldn't have this card in a paper TCG. It's not complicated, it doesn't use RNG at all, but, like, you functionally couldn't have this card in a paper TCG. So when I cast Mind Call, I pick 2 cards in my hand, and it reduces the cost of these cards by 1 permanently. I'm going to go ahead and play this Shard of Innovation, which is a dual shard, so I pick either Ruby or Sapphire. I'm going to go ahead and pick Ruby here. And then my champion power, I hit my 3rd charge, so I get to go ahead and make a Bumblebot. And I'm going to go ahead and play my Flickering Gobbler out here. Hex is supposed to be on tablets by the end of the year, their CEO said, and they're releasing for PlayStation next week. As of that, they officially support, as of right now, they officially support Windows and OS X's platforms, and I'm actually playing it on Linux through Wine. So you'll see the Flickering Gobbler will flick back up to my hand here at end of turn, and it retains that extra power. So every turn, this attacks for one more power. Kind of, right, Pimped Up Buck? But then, like, that changes the functionality. Like, what if my opponent plays a discard spell or a Gataxian Probe? Like, do they look at those cards in my exile too? So, like, do you have a bunch of, like, awkward rules of, like, how this works? Huh. So, Hailstorm is a card that says whenever you Fate Weave, you summon a Hailhawk, which is actually really good against us. So, one of the reasons why this deck that I'm playing is pretty good in the current format is because there aren't a ton of flying blockers, and this lets my opponent generate a ton of flying blockers. I'm going to go ahead and Runebind this in response here. So what Runebind does is it kind of puts my opponent's card in this stasis state. where it stays as this rune until they draw a resource, and then they just use their guidance to draw a resource here. But by doing that, even though my opponent got to get this off of that stasis state right away, I denied them a 2/2. This card gets bigger every time my opponent Fate Weaves, so they Fate Weaved 3 times this turn, so it became an 8/8 until end of turn. Might be in trouble this game. So Transmogrifade's a card that uses a little bit of randomness in a generally effective way. So Transmogrifade turns my opponent's troop into a different troop or constant with cost 1 less. So I turned their 3 cost into a Bumblebot and their 3 cost into this Ashwood Maestro. This matchup's probably pretty terrible for us. Hailstorm's a card that's tough for us to beat. Generally, like I said, this deck is good because the Flickering Gobbler is difficult for people to interact with. But them having a ton of flying blockers makes the Flickering Gobbler much less good. How much of the cost is building competitive decks in Hex compared to Magic Online? So Hex is a full buy, sell, trade secondary market, just like Magic Online does. So the price of the decks are going to vary from season to season. It's not like the dusting system like you have in other games where like you always know that Mythics cost X and Rares cost X. Yeah, we're pretty dead here. And one of the great things about Hex is that the ladder is free to play here. So we don't really have a good board plan for this deck. My opponent's playing a bit of a brew just like we are. So I'm just going to forfeit the match and queue into another one here where my deck is less likely to get hosed. I don't have to worry about feeling obligated to play against this matchup that's awful and miserable for me because I didn't have to put money in to play it. Sweet. So, okay, so opponent is playing Kaigalichu here, it looks like. So Kaigalichu is a 21 health champion that they have for 4 charges. They flip 3 cards into their discard pile and then return a random card from their discard pile to their hand. Seems okay. I get to guarantee my 3rd resource drop with this ice, which is nice. Ice is nice. Sorry, so anyways, the cost of Hex decks. So the cost of Hex decks from season to season varies, but usually the tier 1 decks range somewhere between $80 and $150, with various budget decks being competitive at prices lower than that. I keep a list of, is there a Reanimator style deck? Yeah, actually there's, the Kaigalichu deck is often a like a mid-range Reanimator deck. There's a card called Rotten Rancor that for 5 resources returns one of their troops from their crypt to play. And then there's also a more dedicated Reanimator deck because the champions allow you to enable certain things. So there's my opponent's deck is kind of a mid-range Reanimator deck where it plays like quality troops and has like a Reanimator backup plan. There's also a dedicated Reanimator deck in the current constructed format that has a champion that for 3 charges lets them draw a card and then discard a card. So the Lanupaw site here, you'll see it didn't do anything when I played it out for the turn, but what Lanupaw site does is it modifies the next action, resource, and troop in my deck to give them the line of text when you play this draw card. So the next card I draw will draw a card when I play it. And you can see this Arcane Focus is prophesized and it says when you play this draw a card, as opposed to this Arcane Focus, which is not prophesized. So I'm going to go ahead and play this prophesized one, so I'm going to draw an extra card to start. And then we drew Flickering Gobbler that has draw a card on it. So Flickering Gobbler here is the one that comes back to our hand every turn. So this is one of the combos in this deck, is this guy is going to get to draw a card when we play it every single turn now. So this card, it's going to bounce back to our hand, and the next turn when we play it out again, it's going to draw another card. And as someone who just likes to hang out and draw a bunch of cards, this might be everything I'm interested in doing in life. So my opponent flipped 3 cards in the discard pile, and they got a Well of Ancients back to their hand, which is actually pretty good for us. They flipped 2 pieces of removal in there. I think I'm just going to Transmogrifade this. So Transmogrifade again turns us into a random troop with cost 1 less, and the average 2-drop is much worse than a 4/4. Because remember, there's a lot of draft chafe. So I'm going to go ahead and play this Flickering Gobbler, which draws a card. God bless. Do I just want to solo battle them? Let's go ahead and Arcane Focus and see what we find. So my opponent's playing Hero Fall on my Flickering Gobbler, which I'm going to go ahead and Runebind here, which puts their card into a stasis state. And having that card in a stasis state is really good for us because this Flickering Gobbler is going to come back to my hand here. I'm going to go ahead and play this other Flickering Gobbler. Let's go ahead and smashy here. And again, like I said, like my opponent's deck doesn't have a lot of ways to interact with these flying troops, which is why this deck is very reasonable against a lot of the decks of the format. So like even if my opponent draws a resource now, this removal spell is only going to be able to hit my Bumblebot. And then next turn, I actually have another Runebind if they have another piece of removal, so we're just going to kill them with these Flickering Gobblers. Draw a third card off this Flickering Gobbler. Tasty. Bumblebots take a lot of hits for the team, right? Attack you for 10 in the sky. Get you. Right? The Hex devs definitely have a good time naming the cards in their game. Alright, so what am I doing here post-board? I think I want the Sunsoul Phoenix. So this is a card, so 4/2 for 6. That whenever you play an action, it gets cheaper. So if you play 3 actions in a turn, this card is actually free. But the most important part about this card is we can void 6 actions from our discard pile to replay it from our discard pile for free. I think Pyre Strike's pretty good. This card deals 4 or something and then voids it. I'm going to bring those in. I think I want to trim a Soul of Battle in this matchup because it can be a little bit medium against removal. You trim a Stifling Sting because it's a little expensive. Give this a try. And you can see there, my deck list on the side automatically updates. If you're a geek like I am who's into software stuff, Hex has a user side and a server side API, so we have access to all the information. So when I hit that save button, I have a Python script in the background that's listening that grabs my deck information and then puts it up on the deck list on the side there from my local user client. Yeah, hexpvptools.net. So it's kind of awesome. Not only do you get to see every ladder match that's ever played and the results, when there is a when there's a Hex tournament, so Hex is $1,000 cash tournaments every single weekend. There's a constructed standard tournament on Saturday that has a $7 entry fee, and there's a sealed $1,000 tournament on Sundays, which has a $15 entry fee that includes 6 packs. You can see not only which decks did well in those tournaments, we get every deck list that played in the tournament, and you see every matchup that every deck list in the tournament played against. So if you see like a new brew kind of break through, you can look and see, okay, what did this brew play against? Like what axis were they attacking and what they win against, what they lose against, what kind of things can we work to like shore up some of their matchups, etc., etc. Yeah, that seems pretty good. It's got Flickering Gobbler and a Boltwing Phoenix in it. It's got Arcane Focus. It's got a Transmog to interact with my opponent's first large troop that they play out. I really don't need another resource just yet, so I'm gonna go ahead and put a non-resource on top with this one. Oh, you know what? I should have led on the Sapphire Ice. I probably should have led on the Sapphire Ice there. That dirty, dirty data. At Hogland, always encouraging people to look at the data. Maybe I want to hold on to these. Yeah, I guess holding on to these is probably fine. I can go like Sapphire Ice is a slow shard next turn, Transmogrifade my opponent's 3-drop, and then my 3 can be Arcane Focus plus Flickering Gobbler and Champion Activation. Yeah, being able to see conversion rates is so huge. Like, when you see like okay, this deck list had 2 copies in the top 8, but like if you look and see that like 40% of the field was playing this deck and it put 2 copies in the top 8, you're like, well, this deck list had 2 copies in the top 8, but it actually underperformed because of the number of people playing it. All right, so they're just passing with removal up here. I'm gonna play this. I'm gonna play this Boltwing Phoenix out. So Boltwing Phoenix, when it dies, it has 2 options when it dies. Either I can have it deal damage equal to its power to every troop my opponent controls, or I can return it to my hand. We were talking about powerful answers in Magic earlier, and this card's just like a great example of a powerful answer, right? So this card not only destroys the troop that it's targeting, but it takes every other copy of that troop out of my hand and deck. So I'm actually going to lose the second Boltwing Phoenix out of my hand here when they kill that. But that's fine. This one's going to Thunderous Rebirth and pop back up to my hand here. And then I can play this out again next turn. Why was this deck not renamed to the birds and the bees? It's a good question. Asking the hard-hitting ones. Asking the real hard-hitting questions. I mean, every great deck starts as a bad brew, right? Bumblepots, they are bees. Robot insect. I love his artwork too, just like shooting a bee out of a cannon. Just like come at me, bro. This deck is all about getting people. I love getting people got with Flickering Gobblers. He's my favorite. Look at him. Look at him, just like his little like pug nose and his. Oh no! Oh no! The disconnect is blocking my artwork. And he's like farting along. He powers himself by like rocket gas. Hopefully our opponent's internet comes to. There we go. You can see his glorious little gaseous propellant here. Can I put his arm back on?
No. Oh, push on.
Where's the last arm? You gotta go find it, man. You're the one that ripped his arm off. So the one important difference to note between Hex and Hearthstone is that Hearthstone is a good, what I like to call, soundbite game. If you're looking for a game to play for 5 minutes while you poop, Hex is not that game. Hearthstone games are short and fast and they're clean. Hex games are long and offer a lot of depth and intricacy in them in a similar way that you expect from a game where you're going to play for longer than 5 minutes while you're using the bathroom. When I sit down to play Hex, I know I'm going to get to actually play interactive games. I'm going to get to play games where we both get to make a lot of decisions, which is enjoyable to me. The fact that their ladder is best of 3 is the best. Like, that's the biggest, like, so many of the CCGs, when you try them, it's like, man, if I just had a sideboard, this matchup would be a lot less frustrating. Yeah, Hex offers. There's one, the Evo Sealed is the limited format that's not best of 3. Evo Sealed's like their short format. For those of us that it's been a while since we played Hearthstone, what's the arena? Is that their asynchronous draft format? If so, I agree. Hex really, I would like an asynchronous draft format. So the drafting in Hex, for those that haven't done it before, is currently done in a pod draft. You wait for 8 people to all get into the queue together, then you draft your pod. You play your matches asynchronously, but you still draft in a circle. Yeah, asynchronous draft format is definitely great. Looks like my opponent's just gonna end up typing out here. That's sad. That's fine. We got the dumpster in the first game. So there's a lot of different ways that you can work asynchronous drafting. I really like the way Eternal Card Game does it. So Eternal Card Game has everyone draft 12 card packs, and you just get to draft on your own on demand. And when after you take a card from a pack, it stores your pack in a database, and then it passes all of your packs to the same person. One of the things that I enjoyed about jumping into Hex is that because there's a full buy, sell, trade secondary market, actually a good chance to plug the sponsors, hexprimal.com, they buy and sell Hex TCG singles. So if you want to just jump into the constructed on here, I've got a couple of budget deck lists that I keep on my website that are very reasonable to play, and the constructed ladder is completely free to dive into. So if you pick up one of those decks, you can just play the constructed ladder a bunch and not worry about losing money while you're still learning the game, because it doesn't cost you anything to play the competitive matches. And once you get a hang of it, you actually earn prizes on the constructed ladder as well. One of my pet peeves, Pimped Up Monk, is when people refer to pod drafting as normal drafting. I think if you do the asynchronous drafting similar to like Eternal does, you just don't need pod drafting. Pod drafting is just one of those things that's like a holdover from people wanting their digital card game to mirror everything from a paper card game, including the bad parts. Like, pod drafting is awkward and inconvenient. If I'm not pod drafting with 8 other people I know to like have a small tournament, like there's no reason for me to be pod drafting. Like if I'm just playing against random other people on the internet anyways, just let me play asynchronously so that way it's convenient. It kind of adds a layer of depth. It adds a layer of memorization where you need to memorize the cards you're passing because your opponent might or might not have them. But like, people often overstate the impact that hate drafting has on the games that they're playing. So my opponent's champion here, 22 health. For 5 charges, I summon a Dread Banner, which gives them a Dreadling every single turn that attacks me. Usually this is a mono blood deck like my opponent is playing. I got an Arcane Focus here. I'm actually going to grab a Ruby Ice here as opposed to another Ooh, I messed up. I forget which resource I played on what. If I had a Sapphire to start that turn, I should have focused before playing a resource. Yeah, Runebind would be ideal so we could protect our Flickering Gobbler. So I think while my opponent has removal up here, because the blood deck is a very removal heavy deck, I'm just going to go ahead and play this Well of Innovation out and play this Boltwing Phoenix, because if they kill my Boltwing Phoenix, the Boltwing Phoenix is just going to jump up back into my hand here. And if they don't kill it, well, I've got a 2-power guy beating them down. A well done asynchronous draft format will send you signals on what is and isn't open. Eternal's asynchronous draft format sends signals on what is and isn't open. Just for the record. in Eternal's asynchronous draft format, because it's excellent, you get all of your packs through the same people. It stores the packs as they get drafted and then passes them down. Let me go ahead and bring this Phoenix back to my hand. I don't actually know if they wheel or not. I'm not sure. They only do 12 card packs at Eternal, so I'm not sure if they have a system that implements wheels. Soul of Battle. Am I just playing this Boltwing Phoenix again? A lot of choices here. These double soul battles. I feel like my opponent has a piece of removal here, so I kind of want to like save this soul and the Flickering Gobbler for a turn when they're not holding removal up. They killed this. It's going to come back to my hand here, I think. That card's really good. So Bride of the Dam says, whenever you gain a blood threshold, it gives an opposing troop -1/-1 permanently. And then if you have 5 or more blood thresholds, when an opposing troop dies, it comes back into play under your control. So they're going to get to kill my Bumblebot here, and then they're going to get to steal it. Hopefully they don't mill one of my prophesized cards here. Alright, here's hoping this Flickering Gobbler can steal the game for us. It might, actually. So that Flickering Gobbler draws a card. Now this Flickering Gobbler is going to come into play. And I'm going to Soul Battle him, which gives him double damage. Then I'm going to Soul Battle him again, which gives him 4x damage. And then I'm going to hit my Champion Power here. I'm going to go ahead and attack my opponent with this 3-power Flickering Gobbler that deals 4x damage. So they take a total of 13 here. This pops back into my hand. So you can see... Oh no! Oh no! I forgot that's how that worked! Oh no! Oh no! So... Soul of Battle... You saw all the zones that changed, right? So Soul of Battle made it so this dies at end of turn. But then Flickering Gobbler brings itself back to your hand... But then Bride of the Dam takes it over. So it did the full loop, right? Like, it died, it came back to my hand, and then it went to my opponent's side of the board. Just the full circle. Alright, we're pretty dead. It does not keep it because the Bride reverts it. That was things that didn't go as expected. Alright, let's bring in these Pyre Strikes and cut these Soul Battles. Do I want the Sunsoul Phoenix? Probably. You need more? The Circle of Strife. There you go. There's more. More food for the tiny fat man. It's okay. If he gets a Flickering Gobbler, the Mind Calls will be really good. Oh, without the Bride. Yeah, it keeps the extra damage on it. Yeah, that's true, Mealy-Mouth. You could also work it where you pass the cards through. You could artificially generate packs that wheel and pass them through an AI, where like you generate a pack and then based on pick priorities have the computer draft archetypes similar to a human would. It requires some complex like machine learning basically to have the computer learn how the draft format's supposed to work. But it's definitely possible. Put a non-resource on top of my deck with that ice. Hopefully find a Flickering Gobbler here. Stifling Sting's okay. I mean, Ace, you could just start by having the AI have artificial rankings or like rankings that you manually inserted into the start of the draft format, and then have the AI adapt as people start to draft the format differently. Yeah, I mean, async is basically sealed plus, and that's fine, right? Like, I would enjoy a format that's sealed plus. I just want to play with higher powered, consistent decks. Like all limited formats are variations of sealed, essentially. We're gonna try a different deck. This deck's cute, but it's not very good.